Hi, this is Margaret Meloni, and welcome to the Death Dhamma podcast. Open and honest discussions with wise and skillful teachers about their experiences with life, death, and Buddhism. If you wonder how others on the path have dealt with death and dying and grief, then be sure to listen in. Everybody has a story, a perspective, and a valuable lesson to share. Embrace death, live a full life, and learn how to love impermanence. Because as my dear father used to say, nobody gets out of this alive. Hello and welcome to today's episode. And before we jump in, I want to encourage you, visit me at margaretmeloni.com and sign up because you will get all the updates on when my next book, Sitting with Death, will be released, which is in September, and which is based on all of these great discussions we're having here on the podcast. Plus, of course, there's more. And you will receive a free audio of part of the introduction to my first book, Carpooling with Death. And if you're on the list, you will receive a audio chapter for free of Sitting with Death when it is released. So, oh my goodness, so many good reasons to come join me. And of course, please continue to subscribe to the podcast. And thank you so much for being here. Today, I am with Cayce Howe. I am so happy that he is spending time. Spoiler alert for everyone, Cayce has been my teacher because I have sat in his meditation and groups and through his Dharma talks. And today he has graciously agreed to talk with us about death. And
Hello,
Cayce,
hello.
Maybe you would like to share a little bit about yourself.
I'm a senior meditation teacher for Insight LA. I've been on the spiritual path, meditation path since, like the late 80s, early 90s. Yeah, I teach a lot in clinical settings, actually, like in mental health and more secular settings. And I really love to see how the Dharma can be implemented in everyday life and in so many different ways. I like writing too, something about me. I love putting the essence of Dharma in short poems. I wrote a book, Becoming Water, which is a series of really pithy short poems on the Dharma. So yeah, it's a little bit about me.
Oh, thank you. And everyone, just so you know, that Becoming Water, it's one of those amazing gifts of poetry. And, you can read it so many different ways, but I know a couple of us, we've kind of agreed that you just take the book and you open it, and the page you open it to is the page you're meant to read that day. And, it's one of those,
Lovely.
I think it's one of those things. So it's very helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, let's jump in. When did you first develop an understanding of death as a reality as opposed to like this conceptual thing that happens?
I think for me, it must have been maybe 7th grade, I want to say. It was when I lost my first dog.
Okay.
That was it for me. Yeah, and I remember my mom was on the phone to the vet. I don't know if I remembered if she was gonna die or something like that. Like I didn't have any concept, but I remember my mom telling me, and that's when it really hit home for me.
Oh, how did she tell you? If I can ask, do you remember, how did she tell you?
I think she just said, Shiloh passed away. Just,
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, and so this might sound like a dumb question because you were in 7th grade, so I'm guessing you knew what that meant?
Yeah, I knew what that meant, yeah.
Pets are, I guess, good learning for so many things. Like I'm not even a parent, but I understand from watching my friends that pets are how so many of us learn about different problems in life and negotiating life and aging and maybe birth. I mean, the first time I think I understood learning about birth was watching a cow give birth.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And it is it's how we learn about sickness and death sometimes too.
Yeah. I think the same. I think she gave birth to a litter too. So,
right?
Yeah.
It's like they're this great little, there's great little teachers. And now, of course, your dog was important to you, but now in this time, whatever people may think about this, we have placed huge importance on our pets in our society.
Mm-hmm.
We just flat out treat them like family members. When I was a kid,
Yeah,
there was still more of a distinction, although our pets were loved. There was a little bit more of a distinction, and now, not so much. So the death
not
of a
so
pet
much.
is very traumatic to our friends
Yeah.
and to possibly to you and I too. Still,
Yeah, in my family, they were one of the family. Yeah, for
okay,
sure. Yeah, that's how they were treated back then too.
okay, beautiful.
Yeah.
How did it hit you? Did you rage and deny or ignore it, accept it?
Um, I was like in shambles. Yeah, it just crushed me. Yeah, I just
Yeah.
loved that dog to death. And I didn't really know anything else. Like, that dog and I grew up together. And from the time I was born, I had that dog. So
Mhm.
it was just kind of crushing, overwhelmed with sadness type of feeling for
That makes
sure.
sense. That makes sense. We had this cat. I'm sorry, because you said, you grew up and you didn't know any differently.
Yeah.
We teased my parents that this cat was their test because they had the
Mm.
cat before they adopted us. And so it was the test of like Putty was his name. If
Oh,
Putty was the
yeah.
test to whether or not they wanted to have children, he lived to
Right.
be 17.
Wow.
Yeah. So, yes. So like all my life, like this cat was like
Yeah.
my cat older brother.
Right. Right.
It's true.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
they're like
it
a
is true.
sibling. Yeah.
It's true. When you were 7, I'm not sure if you were a Buddhist yet.
Nope. Not
No,
even
probably. I'm guessing
close.
probably not. Probably not, right?
Yeah, not even close.
Yeah, because we don't come from that background. Some people,
Right.
but you and I, growing up in the United States, we don't come from that background.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if you don't mind, I'm going to call it fast forward, if you will.
Sure.
After you became a Buddhist and you encountered death, can you relay an experience of maybe one of the early or first times that you remembered dealing with death as a Buddhist?
Well, it's kind of interesting because one of my earlier introductions to Buddhism, even though I was meditating for quite a long time, but I began to live at Land of Medicine Buddha,
Mm-hmm.
in SoCal, California, and it was a beautiful training ground for looking at death because the cabin where I lived was actually at the top of the staircase where there was just two cabins. We went to the one staircase, two cabins. The cabin on the right was the hospice cabin, and
Mm-hmm.
the cabin on the left was mine.
Okay.
So for 2 years, um, I got to see death every single day. I got to walk up that staircase, and there might be somebody in hospice care. They might be outside or they might be inside. And then my teacher, Venerable Tenzin Chogi, kind of headed up that hospice care program. But there were times when I was the first one there. Kind of as I was really getting entrenched with impermanence and meditation on impermanence, meditation on death and dying and impermanence, I was able to see this every day, see this person. And Lama Zopa, who
Mm-hmm.
kind of oversaw, those FPMT centers and the Galupa tradition, he had a wonderful saying, and he would say that don't forget that alive people are dying before dying people every day, meaning that somebody in the hospice care, and he would even point to that, and somebody in the hospice home is going to make it through the day, and then somebody who is alive and well is
Mm-hmm.
not, through some accident or something, is not going to make it. And of course, he was using this for inspiration for practice. Like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, you have the causes and conditions today for practice. Get to it. Nothing's going to be guaranteed. So yeah, so my introduction, kind of walked kind of alongside um, each other with this actual real life representation, and then
Mm-hmm.
along with the teachings.
I had no idea. And it's another reason why this is so great to get to talk to you like this and about this, because you have shared with me about your time living in the cabin, but we've never touched on the fact that your cabin was next to the hospice cabin
That's
in all
true.
the times that
Yeah.
you've told me about that you were there.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I ever told you. So for people who are listening to this, when my husband was in hospice, Cayce came to the house and led us through meditation. And that saying that you just said that
Mm,
you were taught, you also imparted that saying to me: the
mm,
living are dying and the dying are living. And
mm,
that was so helpful.
Mm.
And that's interesting because I never knew the origin of that. So that's great to learn that today. Thank you so much. Yeah, that was so helpful to me and to
Yeah, for
Ed
sure.
too. Yeah, just that whole
Yeah.
thing is like, this is how it is. Everybody's gonna die. You are officially dying, but
Hmm.
by the way, so is everyone else.
Right, right.
Day might not be the day you die, but it is going to be the day for someone
Hmm.
else.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that was tremendously helpful. And so, was there anything about your experience next to the hospice cabin or in negotiating deaths is there anything that surprised you?
Well, I think it just it surprised me well, first kind of surprised me just being face to face with it. It was
Mm-hmm.
my first time being face to face with it like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, honestly, I had an aversion to the whole death and impermanence meditation stuff.
Okay.
I came from living at like more of a Hindu lineage center before that for a couple
Mm-hmm.
years, and it was very much bliss based. I would say that there was a lot of talk around bliss and higher states of awareness and meditation. The goal was more oriented towards that style, that flavor of liberation or freedom being described in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And then moving to the Tibetan Buddhist centers, it was very much focused on impermanence
Mm-hmm.
and being with the reality of change and things like this. And I thought, man, why are we meditating on this? Like, that's silly. We should
Oh.
be meditating on bliss and all this other stuff, right? So I had an aversion, and then I was living next to hospice care, so it was this really really strong sense of impermanence that I was being faced with. And so I think that there was that initial reaction, and then the surprising factor was how much it helped, because I just saw the reality of it. I saw that, wow, we're not sidestepping anything here. Like, this is
Mm-hmm.
real. I mean, and it's dealing with what is real and being able to be with what is real. And again, this is not any kind of imagination or moving away from anything. We're actually looking at things exactly as they are, and changing our relationship with them. And so over time, it became something that was very natural. I remember Pema Chodron talking about, I think it was like her 80th birthday, I want to
Mm-hmm.
say something like this. And she was saying how scared she was of death. And she's like, well, I'm 80 now. What do I have? Like 10 years left or something like this.
Mm-hmm.
She's like, luckily I've been focusing on death and impermanence for so long now that I don't have the fear anymore. And I'm so grateful to have been doing this, for contemplating this reality of life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it was similar for me. Not like I'm in any state of fearlessness like Pema Chodron, but
Mm-hmm.
I definitely felt that shift. Like, oh, I'm so thankful to be looking at reality just as it is, and being able to work with my relationship to that.
Okay, and that makes sense. And do you remember about how long it took from being in a place of resisting death meditation and death practices to, for lack of a better term, coming out the other side? And then you can help me
Mm.
with that phrase of what it was really like. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know time wise,
Mm-hmm.
but I think the interesting part of it is seeing the little deaths, and I think it's probably hard to tell, at least for me, when on the path of meditation or whatnot, some of these things start to become clearer, or there is a relief of suffering in some way, because I really think, at least for me,
Mm-hmm.
it's just been chipping away. Very few big epiphanies or big insights or something like this, but a lot of little chipping away. And I think that's the beautiful thing about the practice, is that we're watching change. We're watching death, if you will, the death of a moment, the death of a thought, the death of an emotion, a death of a sensation, a death of a phenomena, a visual phenomena, a
Mm-hmm.
death of a sound phenomena or something, the death of a label, a concept, somebody you thought was someone was like this, but then you saw them in a different way. So through the practice of moment to moment mindfulness, moment to moment awareness, seeing change as just the most core basic essence of reality. It's change all the time, all the time. And some are small, some are very big. And I think this has been, such a great benefit. Joseph Goldstein has that wonderful saying he likes to repeat to himself, which is, anything could happen at any time. And I really like that. And I hear myself telling myself that all the time, reminding myself that all the time. But I think the experience of the practice, the experience of the path, and especially in awareness and mindfulness and meditation, and be very keen on what's happening in the here and now, because when we do, we see that there's things that are arising, and we see things falling away, and it's happening moment to moment. So I think looking at that over the years, and just being in tune with that, in tune with something is sloughing away, like every single moment, just how it is.
That is so helpful. So much. You just said so many helpful things. Let me see if I can grasp a couple of them, just because I think it's so useful for all of us. Hopefully not just me here today, but gradual, I kind of am interpreting some of this like that gradual acceptance of impermanence and its natural progression. Then I feel like, so there are absolutely death practices and meditations and things that are available to us. And also, if we stick with the understanding of impermanence and stick with it, and like you said, watch like a moment comes and goes, a thought comes and goes. And if I follow that through to the natural progression, it's like my pet comes and goes, when we're younger. My grandparent, sometimes in life, the natural progression of death is pets, grandparents. For some people, that certainly is not how it worked, though. And so that's that natural, like, oh. And yet I appreciate also what you said, which is that it isn't always like some kind of, you didn't use this phrase, but it isn't always you sit and then you have this amazing aha moment. It is a stay with the learnings and progress through the learnings. And I appreciate that, because I do think that sometimes there can be this expectation of, I'm going to sit and I'm going to have this epiphany, or this is the weekend I'm going on retreat, and by the end of the weekend, I'm going to be completely comfortable with death.
Yeah, I think that's a huge obstacle for me too. Right? Yeah.
It's not like mastering calculus or something.
Right.
Yeah,
I think that obstacle there, which I've seen in myself just a ton, just being such a seeker, is that we really forget, and I know this is cliche at this time, but is that it's here. We forget if we're looking for some epiphany, we can't see that the epiphany is here. We can't see that everything we need to learn, we could learn in a moment. We're just pointing to that impermanence. There's nothing that's not here. And so that expectation, and for myself, has taken me away so much from experiencing the truth of this moment.
Which is, sometimes we become so distracted, we forget about the moment. We're thinking about the next moment.
We're so distracted, even the seeking, the seeking mind. One of my little poems in the book is, we are seeking non-seeking mind.
And while I'm seeking, and this is going to sound, I don't mean to sound morbid like it sounds, but it's a truth. And while I'm busy seeking, I'm getting closer to my own death. Then it comes back to, how do I want to be spending my time, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
How would you describe grief? If you needed to describe grief to, say, like your best friend hasn't experienced grief yet, how would you prepare him or her?
That's an interesting question, because, I think there's the concepts of grief. Because I think with any emotion, I think it's interesting that it's so personal, and and yet we have the words, and we we say things like grief or sadness or
Mm-hmm.
happiness, joy, fear. But I don't know if any of us know what the other's version of that is. I don't know if your version of fear is mine or my version of fear, has anything to do with yours actually.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's so personal, and with grief, um, I think as far as being able to kind of prepare oneself is how we should be able to prepare oneself by being with the actual experience of it, because even something like grief, there's small grief, there's like, I ran out of jelly grief. I have peanut butter, i
Mm-hmm.
have i have the bread, where's the jelly, there's that grief. And then there's like, like talked about, I lost my dog, kind of a grief,
Yes.
or something like this. And so um, I think that to prepare ourselves for grief, like we've been mentioning, we need to
Mm-hmm.
train ourselves to be very familiar with what is. I like one of the oldest translations of meditation is simply to become familiar with, to become familiar with. And then
Mm.
if we become familiar with the nature of an emotion, doesn't matter what an emotion is, all
Mm-hmm.
the nature of all emotions is the same. It's in process. This is the nature of all emotion. It's the nature of all thoughts. Thoughts are in process. They're in movement. They're coming and going. And I think that the suffering that comes from, like my suffering with, let's say, back to that seventh grade boy who lost his dog,
Mm-hmm.
my suffering came because I wanted the dog back.
Ah, yes.
I wanted the dog back. Is that I really needed my dog back. I couldn't be with the emotions. I had to be with, I wanted her back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, so I think the preparation would be to describe it. I don't think I could. I don't think I'd want to. I wouldn't want to describe it to my friend, because if I described it to him or her,
Mm-hmm.
then then it would be conceptual, and they wouldn't be able to be with that experience. And if they can't be with that experience, and they can't see that that experience would come and it would go, because the concept doesn't. Like our mind will make up something that could stay. Oh, I need
Mm-hmm.
my dog back. But we
Mm-hmm.
forget the sadness is already gone. The sadness could have already moved on.
Right.
But we have that concept, that belief. Same thing with like fear. Fear could be gone. But as long as we keep that kind of belief, that concept, then we can kind of continue it along, give it too much emphasis.
Gosh, that makes a lot of sense. I think I hear there will be fear, but our fears are different. So I can't tell you. And I like what you said about like, I don't even want to describe it to someone. I think because
Mm-hmm.
I'm interpreting, and I might be interpreting this falsely, but that also part of the reason to not describe it to someone is because their experience is going to be so different, and you don't want them to wrap their heads around this is what Cayce said grief was, because theirs could be different, and so then that's a whole thing to work through.
Yeah.
Uh, but in that, I do hear that it is that there are elements of fear, there are elements of clinging and suffering, and there is perhaps some selfing, maybe. Again, everyone's experience is different. And
Yeah.
that it's possible that we might hang on to that place of grief because maybe we think we're supposed to say we're in grief when maybe, like you said, maybe the sadness is gone, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
hanging on to this thing,
Mm-hmm.
or I'm clinging to this, but I want my dog, but I
Yeah.
want things to be the same.
It can be very complex, right? Depending on the
Mm-hmm.
grief. And again, the story about it, or the idea about it, or the belief about it. But very, very rarely are we with the experience of it. What is grief? That's a wonderful, koan.
I guess
It's,
so, isn't it?
what is grief? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and again, we have these words which I think are very inferior to describe what something actually is, because there's such a large spectrum. Like I mentioned, with the different levels of grief, there's very subtle grief and there's very large grief. I mean, why do we have one word for that? You know, um,
We are limited.
we are limited. You can say disappointment and this and that, right?
Mhm.
But I think what's better is if we drop all the words and we're just with the experience of it, and then seeing, can we be with that? Can we be with the experience of it? Because even if you have a very, traumatic happened or something that
Mhm.
causes very big grief, even that big grief is in process. It's changing, it's shifting.
Mhm.
Even when I remember that experience of overwhelm, I wasn't overwhelmed continuously when my dog died from the very moment I heard that, right? It
Mhm.
was shifting and changing. And I
Mhm.
probably ate dinner that night, and I probably laughed at a TV show. And
Mhm.
you know what I mean? In that time,
Sure.
if you ask me about it, I'll say, well, I was overwhelmed. But actually, moment to moment, I was in process. It was shifting, it was changing. So we could just hold what we have to hold in the moment. This is
Mhm.
what's so important, about just being with it as it is. And not, my idea about it is that we only want to hold what we have to hold. At this moment it's very strong, then we're sitting with really strong feelings.
Mhm.
If in the next moment it's a little bit lighter, then we're sitting with things that are a little bit lighter, not so much, right? So just only holding what we need to hold in that
That's
moment.
very freeing.
Yeah, very freeing.
That is very freeing. Thank you so much for that. Just be. That's advice for every minute of the day, really. And
For sure.
grief, loss, sadness are all moments in a day.
Yes. Yes.
Hmm. And that's so helpful because I don't know about what you've observed. I know certainly I think maybe I went into some of this, as family members started dying and things with some of the shoulds of how it's supposed to be or how I'm supposed to be. And
Mm-hmm.
then I was how I was. And then there was from some, not everyone, but from some of my people, there was some of the how Margaret should be. There's some shoulds. And so to just be able to give someone the support to say you will go through something, just be with it.
Mm-hmm.
That's very freeing.
Yeah,
Very
for
freeing.
sure.
And so I could see why you want to do why that's a kinder thing than maybe to describe grief to someone, because then I hope then we're not setting up anyone for any false experiences or false
Yeah.
expectations. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
true.
beautiful. So have you ever worked with someone where going through experiencing death and grieving challenged their Buddhism? How would you help that if that was a thing you've ever
Mm,
seen?
challenged their Buddhism. That's interesting. I don't think I have. No, I don't think
Mhm.
I've been in that situation, because I think the Buddhism in itself, it points to the reality of what is so
Mhm.
often. So it's like, one thing I really like about Buddhism in particular is that it's not belief based. It's not faith based. It's reality based. And there's nothing wrong with there's also faith based aspects of Buddhism,
Mhm.
and there's nothing wrong with something being faith based. But there's a big difference between what do you believe and what do you know. I think that what do you believe
Mhm.
can change. You know, what do you believe to be true is different than what do you know to be true. And actually, what we know to be true is very, very minimal. Like what we absolutely know to be true, it
Mhm.
actually only exists in this moment. Um, like I think I'm gonna go have dinner at some point after this or whatnot.
Mhm.
But I don't know. I think I'm gonna go take the dog for a walk. But my fiance might be taking the dog for a walk right now. I don't know. So I really like this aspect of Buddhism where it's just hanging out with reality, hanging out with what's here. Yeah, I haven't been in that experience where people have, actually questioned their Buddhism, but
Mhm.
I think that I myself have questioned my ability for non-grasping mind, my
Okay.
ability to access non-attachment, you know, my ability to be with what is as it is, um,
Mhm.
my ability to access love and compassion to people that are harming others for example. So I've definitely seen this in myself, and then, especially with loss and grief, I think it's very difficult to be with those situations without that grasping mind, without that attachment, because we're very attached people.
Yes.
We're taught that actually love is attachment. Let's just say it outward, like every Disney movie in the world, like I'm nothing without you, you're my entire life, I don't exist without you. My life begins, with this relationship, all of that silly stuff. So I think we have a really hard time, for myself too, separating pure sunshine like love that just has no judgment, that just shines,
right,
compared to that me and mine, and I need you to reciprocate in some way type of love. It's totally not love. Totally not, but that's our idea about it.
I think it can be challenging to care for someone and not expect anything in return. And when I say not expect anything in return, what I really mean is it is harder to maybe love someone and know that they may not love you and still love them enough to want them to be happy, even if it means you never see them again.
Yeah.
That is not
for
an easy
sure.
thing.
Yeah, we put that subject object label on love, instead of like jumping into the stream of love. Love has no love, compassion. These energies have no subject and object. It just is. And we're very accustomed to putting those labels on afterwards or whatnot. So
it is a challenging thing.
yeah.
I think that in some ways that this, maybe people might think, where are they going now? That's a different book. That's a different audio. You know what? No, because I think that part of when you lose someone you love, for me, I can't speak for everyone, part of the grief is letting go of those attachments, of recognizing that some of grief does come from attachment.
Yeah, 100%. I mean,
Right.
it's there's a selfish aspect to it, for sure. And I think this is where it starts, and I think this is more kind of quote unquote in quotes advanced as far as in our practice, but it's in a very real way. In meditation, we begin to identify with different aspects of self. Through our attention, we self-identify with our thoughts and emotions. So if we self-identify with sadness, there's a huge difference between sadness is arising in my awareness and I am sad. It's a huge difference. Sadness is arising in my awareness and I am sad. So we could see how sadness arising in our awareness, just like sound is arising in your awareness, but that sound is not you. The sound will never be you, but it's just the same. It's something that is arising in your awareness. But there are some things that, for some reason or another, we self-identify with. Some thoughts, some beliefs, some emotions or whatnot. And then when we identify with it, I am sad. I have a body. I have sensations in the body. I say my finger, but if I hit my finger with a hammer and I have a strong sensation in that finger, I'll say, ouch, I'm in pain, instead of, oh, the finger's in pain. But if we hit our shoe, like we own a shoe, we don't hit our shoe and say, ouch. It's interesting. And when we're in a meditative state and we practice this non-grasping or non-attachment to things that are coming and going, we do get to gain this different perspective through attention. When our awareness is more on what we call awareing, on awareness itself, then there's definitely a relief of that self-identifying nature of suffering. Just that aspect. It's like the pain's still there.
Right.
The sadness is still there, but we don't have this overlay of of oh, me, like I'm hurting, I'm this, I'm that. So it's a big difference.
That was so helpful. I have to say though, first, you're a better person than I if you hit your finger with a hammer and all you say is ouch, because I say things that can't be repeated here. So I guess I have a little bit.
I do too.
Yeah,
I'm being good. I'm being
yeah,
good.
but you're more skilled. But yeah, so I say things that are not for this. This is a family show. But this concept that you talk about, of the recognizing sadness arising versus I am sad, that was a lifeline for me when I was going through the loss of my family, of that. And it didn't mean, how can I say this? It didn't mean I didn't cry. It didn't mean I didn't feel the sadness, but it absolutely did mean that I recognized the sadness, but I didn't have to be the sadness. In other words, I didn't have to inform my whole life or even my whole day. I could just recognize and go, oh, okay, this is here. I'm going to cry now, or this is how it is right now. I don't know that I would have always identified myself as a sad person. I think I would not have identified myself as a sad person. I would have identified myself as a person who had an experience of sadness at some points.
Yeah.
And yeah, it may sound like an odd distinction, but it certainly was a lifeline. Because you don't have to I didn't have to become this whole thing.
Right. It's a really, really important point, because when we do self-identify with those things long enough, we do build a persona around it, and we become a sad person. But when we break it down and look, it's just like, okay, sadness is arising in this moment, and then it's falling away. Just like a ton of other things are happening in our life. Like there might be joyful moments and sad moments, and happiness and moments of kindness and all sorts of stuff. But
and
if we can,
rising and falling,
and they're all arising and falling, and if we pluck out a few things, they're usually negative. This is how the mind works. And then we could say, oh, I suffer from, I'm a depressed person.
Yeah.
Well, not all the time. It's like, this is something that's arising within me. We do build that persona, and then we kind of almost hold ourselves to it in a strange way. So yeah, it's good to take a step back and see things for just as they are, whatever's happening here in the moment.
What else would you want others to know, or what else would you want to share to help others navigate, grieving and facing death?
That it's okay. I think it's huge, is that all these experiences, being human, they're all valid. Grief it's valid. Sadness, it's no problem. That you're okay. You're completely okay. If you have fear, you're okay. If you have, if you're overwhelmed, if you can't practice, we talk about here about, I hope that anything I've said it isn't pointing to the fact that you should be able to hold anything with a certain amount of grace. Sometimes you can't. That's okay. Being overwhelmed is okay. And again, that is going to shift and change, and try not to have so much resistance to like being okay. Like I'm going to tough it out, or I'm going to be. And if you're a Buddhist, and if you're listening to this, like sometimes we have a bigger problem because we're Buddhists. Like, oh, we're supposed to have equanimity and not be overthrown. And man, I've been overthrown decades into my practice, with anxieties and this and that, and I can't see my Buddha nature or anything like that, right? And that's okay.
Yeah,
that's okay. Being able to expand, beyond this concept of being okay looks like this, or dealing with it looks like that. We can expand beyond it, because we're not confining ourselves into a certain something.
Yeah.
Right. As soon as we put the should on there, then we just draw boundaries around our infiniteness. We don't need to put a should on anything.
Yeah.
It's like this. It's a great Zen saying. It's like this. Overwhelm is like this. Being completely crushed by loss it feels like this. This is what it's like.
I did have to rebuild my meditation practice. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
There were times when I just couldn't. I just couldn't. And I
Mm.
found myself rebuilding my practice. And there were times when my meditation looked like me sitting cross-legged on my little cushion and
Mhm.
just ugly crying.
Ugly cry.
Me
Yeah.
and my cats. My cat's
Yeah.
looking at me
Yeah.
like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Oh," and that's just how it
Yeah.
was. That's just how it
Yeah.
was. So, you know,
Yeah. There's a cool Zen saying that the Zen master loses his son, and the student comes up to him and says, "Master, why are you crying?" He says, "Well, I lost my son." And the student says, "Yeah, master, but isn't it all an illusion?" He said, "Yes, but losing a son is the greatest of all illusions."
this has been the Death Dhamma podcast with Margaret Meloni. Thank you for being here. Your reviews and comments are greatly appreciated. And please come find me on margaretmeloni.com. MargaretMeloni. And don't forget to check out Carpooling with Death, How Living with Death Will Make You Stronger, Wiser, and Fearless. Available in all your favorite formats over on Amazon. And most importantly, may you be well. May you be happy. May you be safe, at ease, and free from suffering. Bye for now.